Classified France 44 is a new Second World War themed XCOM-like, with satisfyingly crunchy turn-based tactics that, in my opinion at least, fans of the genre will enjoy. But while the tutorial does a decent job of teaching you the many in-mission gameplay features, including genre staples such as Overwatch, action points and cover mechanics, there are other systems at play that you may be less familiar with. In this video, I'm going to draw on my experience of playing through the campaign to talk about some of the less obvious aspects of the game to help you ensure a successful D-Day. Here are my top 10 tips for Classified France 44. Number 1. Don't just buy everything because you think you can. One thing you'll learn fairly early on in Classified France 44 is that your currency, which comes in the form of supplies, which you get as mission rewards. Here we can see next to the objectives there's a list of how many supplies we'll get for completing those objectives. Regardless of how many you're earning, it won't be enough. So if we go into the shops, you'll learn that you're supporting 3 factions in France: the radicals, left-leaning, the Gaullists, more conservative, and then the criminals like the black marketeers and so on. When you do missions for them, the relationship level with that faction increases, and as it increases, each new tier brings new shop items available. Now early on in the campaign it can be very tempting when you're only using the basic guns, the basic uniform items, to buy improvements as soon as you can, but actually because supplies are in such short supply, it's worth looking down the trees a little bit more and planning out what you think you need. Like, some things are just way better than others. For instance, this purple rifle, 55 supplies. Generally, you get 40 to 50 supplies per mission. And that's assuming you do all the objectives, including secondary ones. So something like a 55 supply rifle, more often than not, you're going to have to be saving for 2 missions to be able to afford that. So any savings you can make earlier on in terms of, you know, some of these fairly basic guns and stuff that aren't hardly any better than what you're already using, it could be worth just holding on and planning ahead for a really nice purchase that would do you for the bulk of the campaign. Number 2, think carefully about which classes you want to recruit. So when you start the campaign, after you finish the tutorial missions, you start off with a group of 4 soldiers. Eventually you can increase this to 8. But the thing is, there's 5 classes within the game, so it simply won't be possible to have 2 for every class. So you have to make some decisions along the way. So you start with a leader type, a support type, a sniper, and a scout. Fairly early on, you get the chance to add a heavy, which I would recommend. It's quite nice to have them for certain types of missions. But beyond that, you'll be able to double up on some of the classes. So some of them you might find more useful than others. Maybe you want to always ensure that you have a sniper on the mission, so it's good to have 2 of those. Likewise, a scout who can do silent takedowns, you're probably always going to want them on a mission unless it's an assault mission. Now I understand from what the developers have said that the recruit missions will arrive at the same point of the campaign periodically. I'm not sure exactly at which points, but you're offered 2 of them at the same time, but you can only complete 1. And the missions that you're offered are sort of randomly selected from a pool of those missions. So yeah, it's difficult to say who to take when. And your favoured class, you know, your own play style will probably dictate which one you want to have more of. But there we go. So you're only allowed 8. There's 5 classes. So have a think about which classes you want to sort of have, which classes you want to double up on, basically. Number 3, plan your ambushes carefully. Now, the ambush mode is one that you'll find most often. I think I'm very near to the end of the campaign as I'm filming this, and I think I've probably only played 4 or 5 missions so far that weren't ambush types. They do get introduced to you in the tutorial, which is nice, but there are aspects of this that I think aren't covered that are important to bear in mind. So just to remind ourselves, ambush missions are ones where you start in stealth as we are high. In fact, this guy is staring directly at me. Actually, that's my contact, so that's not an enemy. This is an early mission. We're unaware at the moment. That tells us the enemy doesn't know we're here. Now, these 4 grey pips here, That is how many stealth kills we're allowed before the game automatically kicks off the ambush. So we can kill 3 of these enemies quite happily. Let's go and let's go. I can't get through the fence right yet. But basically, we could go up to him. We could take him out. And this is quite a large mission, so there will be others to do in here as well. But it can be quite tempting to go in and take down the first 4 enemies you see, just to kind of clear the way for yourself. And then the ambush will kick off. I've found it can be more beneficial, depending on the mission that you're going into, to actually just avoid some of these early enemies, particularly if they're static and not patrolling. Like they're looking one way, they're not turning, they're not moving. So you can quite easily avoid them. You don't need to take them down. The other thing that's worth noting is that when the ambush does kick off, when you go loud, every one of your characters will regain all their action points, and it's still your turn. So effectively, you can sort of abuse that slightly to get 2 full turns for the price of 1. Like if we've taken down 3 soldiers already, and we know this guy's going to be the 4th, what we can do is just maybe even spend a couple of turns just sort of positioning our other troops quite advantageously, like getting some firing zones set up, that sort of thing. And then when we know we're about to take this guy down, choose who's going to do that. Probably a scout, maybe someone who can do a silent kill. But be sure to act with everybody else as much as you need to, as much as you can. Then, with your sort of final soldier of the turn, do the takedown, and then the ambush will kick off, and everyone else will suddenly be at full AP, and you can get some nice overwatches set up. You could throw a grenade. You could shoot someone, shoot someone else. So that can be quite good to take advantage of. Number 4, target which regions you want to unlock first. Now this one's quite important, and it took me quite a long time into the campaign to kind of realise exactly how this works. The first thing that is the most obvious is that there is numerous regions within France on our campaign map, each region of which is broken down into 3 separate territories. And each of these regions comes with its own buff that will offer to your campaign as and when you unlock all 3 territories within that region. For example, if we were to do all of the territories within Pays de la Loire, we would be able to do extra morale damage on ambush turns. For me, that's quite situational, so perhaps not one of the better ones. But there is others like doing more morale damage all the time, improving resistance strength, every ally gaining +5 max morale, so that's quite a good one. In any case, it's worth going in and seeing which ones you think will be most useful to you, and those being the first ones you unlock. To go into a little more detail, how it works is that when you complete a mission for a faction, so in this case the criminals in this faction with this graveyard shift assault, when we've completed the mission, we'll return to this map afterwards, and it'll say something like, choose which territory to unlock. Now, when I started the game, I assumed how it worked was, you could only do that within the region that the mission had taken place in. So I was kind of, my territories that I'd unlocked were scattered around most of the map. But how it actually works is that when you, say, have done this mission for the criminals faction, you can then unlock any territory within any region that the criminals operates. For example, they're here in Ile-de-France. They aren't actually that many of them. There's only 2 for the criminals, I think, but they're also in Nord-Pas-de-Calais, and we'll talk about this region in particular in the next point. But basically, as you do these missions, and you're going to be doing, you can't sort of target them in as much as you only really get a choice of 2 or 3 missions at a time, generally 1 for each faction until you've moved on to the next round. But after, say, 4 or 5 missions, you probably can have one of these regions fully unlocked and getting the bonuses from that. So yeah, you can be quite targeted, and as you do missions, don't forget to choose the region which contains the territory within the region that you want to unlock sooner. Number 5, unlock Nord-Pas-de-Calais as soon as possible. So Nord-Pas-de-Calais, we talked in the last point about region bonuses. For my money, the one in this criminals region, this hospital buff, is the best one in the game. So I'll talk in a minute about why you need to rotate soldiers and debuffs and stuff, but essentially, probably give it 2 or 3 missions, but after that point, you're going to want to have someone in the hospital being cured pretty much every mission. because debuffs do come quite thick and fast, and the only way to clear a lot of those is within the hospital. At the beginning of the game, it takes 4 days to cure someone in the hospital. But when you unlock this region, that's halved too. And you'll find that most of the missions within the game take 2 days to complete. So what that means is, at the beginning, you put someone in hospital, they're missing for 2 missions, but also you can't put someone else in for those 2 missions. There's only 1 hospital slot. Whereas when you have unlocked this region, you can do that every mission. And that is huge. That is actually huge. So please do bear that in mind, that when you're doing those criminals missions, be sure to unlock Nord-Pas-de-Calais first. Number 6, rotate your soldiers carefully. So I talked in the last point about debuffs in the hospitals. So you'll pick this up fairly soon, but it's worth just quickly recapping. So when you do missions, your soldiers, every time they do a mission, will get a point of fatigue. And that means that they'll lose an action point in the next mission. For instance, if we click on Johnson here, we can see that fatigue, he's got 1 stack, his AP is reduced by 1. If he was to do another mission with that debuff, he would then have fatigue times 2 and have 2 fewer action points on his subsequent missions. So the only way to clear fatigue, there are a few ways actually. So the best way to clear fatigue is after the mission, 2 of your soldiers will chat, and when they do, it'll take away a stack of fatigue for both soldiers. So, and increase their morale. So it's always worth doing that every single mission. The other way to do it is to leave them in camp. So if I left Johnson in the camp for my next mission, when I came back, this stack of fatigue would be gone. I think you can also do it in the hospital, but you would do that sort of as well as other stuff. You wouldn't just put them in the hospital for fatigue, because you can do it in other ways. But what you'll really want to do is avoid vicious circle situations, vicious cycles, and how that comes about is with the other 2 really. So physical. Every stack means their max health is reduced by 10%. So in this case, he's lost 2 health. And you lose health when your soldiers get downed within a mission. There's no permadeath in Classified France 44, but if a soldier is reduced to 0 HP, they get downed. They can be revived, but even if they're at full health and got downed a second time, they retreat. They're no longer available in that mission. But every time they're downed, they get a stack of this physical debuff, which, as you can imagine, the more stacks you have, the easier it is to down that soldier, and then that physical debuff can build up higher and higher. And this is even more true for mental in my experience. The morale debuff, again, 10% loss, which because these scores tend to be higher means that we've actually lost 12 of our capacity for morale. And this happens when your soldiers get their morale broken, which we'll speak about it again in this list in a bit. When they're reduced to 0 morale within a mission, they get broken, and then they get a stack of this debuff. And I think because you can get your morale back, I think if you get broken again, I think you get more than 1 stack. I think it's every time you get broken. And the important thing to note is that the only way you can remove the physical and mental debuffs is in the hospital. So you can see why it's important to always have a soldier in the hospital recovering, because when they come out, their slate will be wiped clean. I think last time I put Anson in, I think he had a stack in each. He went to the hospital, which is now only 2 days for my campaign, and next mission he's available. He's had his slate wiped clean. So that's why it's important to do that. Number 7, check weapon mods. Now in the game there are different qualities of gear. You have sort of, it kind of works a bit like MMOs if you've ever played one. Like you have white quality, which is very basic, green, which is a little bit better, blue, which is pretty good, and then purple, which is brilliant. But it doesn't necessarily follow that a green weapon will be better than a white one, or a blue will be better than a green one. And the reason for that is weapon mods. So if we show details on say this rifle, the Enfield No. 4 Kite, we can see that it has some stuff which is indicated in its sort of main panel here. Largely you can see the crit damage, but what you can't see is the camo element. So you get an extra 5% cover bonus using this weapon, and also it has armor piercing, which again does not appear in this list. And particularly later on in the campaign, you'll find that most enemies have at least 1 or 2 points of armor, some as many as 4 or 5. And so if you're doing armor pierce, your weapon is way more effective than if it just did more base damage but didn't have that. So if we look at I'll try and find one that doesn't. So for instance, okay, so this is a green weapon, but we can see that it has more base damage, etc., but it doesn't have the armor pierce. The purple rifle, I actually saved up for this and spent a lot of money on it because I saw how good it was. This one does 3 armor pierce, which is very, very good. But you know, there are some blue weapons and stuff, if I try and find an example, that don't really have any weapon mods, or ones that don't really matter as much to you. And in my experience, like this one, this is a blue Sten, right? It's pretty good base stats, but it has no mods. There's no armor pierce, there's no extra cover bonus or anything like that. So it's always worth, but especially before you spend precious supplies buying a new weapon, check out the weapon mods and just make sure it's something that you think you'll get good use out of, is my advice. Number 8. Plan your class archetypes before you start leveling up a character. So if we go into the skill trees, you can see that for every character, every class, they have 4 different archetypes that they can build towards. For instance, we're in the scout tree now. We could go towards the blade master build, spotter, Tommy gunner, or survivalist. And they each kind of lean into a build. Like say Tommy gunner, pretty obvious. It kind of leans into your submachine gun, like buffing that and giving it some nice passive effects. If you were to go in the blade master, it's all about melee and building up your melee skill, getting some action points back after a melee kill. In fact, I've taken Kumba here into the blade master tree, and I love it. He's my favourite character because he does insane damage with the knife he's using and gets action points after every kill, so he can kind of get to cover or chain kills together even. It's very, very strong. But it's worth looking down the trees when you start leveling and just kind of see which archetype you think will be most useful for your playstyle. I will say that I think I've got 2 or 3 missions left in the campaign, so I'm fairly far along, but I've not yet finished. And someone like Tremblay here, who's level 25, you get 1 skill point per level. Most of these skills cost 1 to unlock, some of them are 2. But I think you definitely will get enough throughout the campaign to fully max out 2 full archetypes. Or you might prefer to do what I'm doing, which is kind of lean into 1 archetype and then I'll subsequently kind of pick and choose talents which you think kind of build into that, like giving yourself an extra action point up here, or improving morale or health elsewhere. But really, the archetype will kind of shape the build for that character within the class. So do have a think ahead of time, especially early on when you haven't leveled up quite as much and you need to be a bit more targeted about what you go for. So have a think about which sort of build you want to lean into most with that character. Number 9. Think about the best group makeup for a particular mission type. This one ties in with the rotation of soldiers as well. I mean, I think you have to be... you could be a little more strategic than I am. But basically, you'll generally have a selection of 2 or 3 missions to take at any one time. And most of them are ambush, as I've said. You'll also have stealth missions and assault missions. And it's worth thinking ahead a little bit in terms of rotation of your party. To think about who would do best. For instance, I can only choose this assault mission now, but someone like Johnson, my heavy, who I definitely want on an assault mission with his machine gun, he's quite debuffed. Ideally, I'd probably stick him in the hospital. If Boulanger... Actually, no, Boulanger's not in the hospital. Vittel is. But I would have to take Johnson anyway, because heavies are just really, really good on assault-type missions. But for this type of mission, you would probably try to avoid taking 2 snipers. Or 2 support. So it's worth... The best groups are generally quite balanced, I'd say, but I would definitely at most take 1 sniper who are good at taking down single targets, but an assault, when you're up against it from the very first turn, it's worth having classes that use weapons with a bit of spread. So the scouts with an SMG are actually decent at that, as are the shotguns you get on the support characters. Cassidy maybe not quite as much with the leaders with their sort of semi-automatic rifles. But for my money, these types definitely you want the heavy. But for a stealth mission or even an ambush mission, taking 2 scouts, in my experience, is fine. That's actually something I tend to do quite a lot because they both can do silent kills. Someone like Henri I would also try and take as well because he can silently plant demolition charges or cut through wire fences and stuff. So that could be quite valuable. So the heavy is way less useful on a stealth mission. So again, think ahead to what missions you've got coming up and try and rotate accordingly and make sure that you have the characters available when you want them. Number 10. abuse the morale system as much as you can. So I think I spoke briefly earlier about when your soldiers have their morale reduced to 0, they get broken. As you also learn that when that happens, they miss a turn, basically. When they reach 50% morale, they're considered suppressed, and they have 50% action points, both of which are really bad, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. However, the same is true for the enemy. So, especially later on, a lot of the troops you're facing are very high health, and it's next to impossible to take them down with one shot. Snipers, if they're very lucky, might, but someone like this heavy, who also has 2 armor points here, we're not taking him down in one turn. And different enemies, or different enemy types, inflict different amounts of morale damage. So someone like the sniper, surprisingly, I don't think does quite as much morale damage as others. The riflemen do a decent amount, the sappers with their grenades and stuff do quite a bit, but the heavies, these are the absolute gits. These are the guys that had me probably swearing at the screen more than any other class, because they can do a machine gun volley, which just can break one of your units in one go. So suddenly you've got this guy with this lovely Overwatch turn plan set up. This heavy will come in and not only knock out the Overwatch, but break that character so they don't even act on their next turn. And that is horrible when it happens. So you want to avoid that. And the best way to do that is to be targeted about breaking enemies on your go. So, for example, I've got Kumba here, who I've said is a bit of a melee build. And I can... In fact, I'm not going to spoil what I did in this exact scenario because it's coming up quite late in my series. But just to quickly show that I can come up to this heavy, who's the one I'm probably most dreading taking his turn, and we can see on the little preview there that it's going to break him. It's not going to kill him. He's only going to be reduced to, at best, 50% health, but he'll miss his next turn. So by doing this, we can come up, and we've taken out probably the biggest threat facing us for the next go. I mean, I did do something better in the actual level, because this isn't still a great position, because our melee guy here is completely hung out to dry there. But it's just an example to show that if you know you can't kill an enemy, the next best option is to just suppress or break them so that they're restricted in what they can do on their next turn. So there we go. Those are my top 10 tips for Classified France 44. And I hope if you pick it up that you'll have as much fun with it as I do. The tips I've chosen, as I said, I've tried to go for ones that are perhaps a little less obvious, stuff that the tutorial doesn't really tell you, and I had to figure out a bit for myself. So, you know, if I've saved you the effort of doing that, then that's the main thing. So if you did enjoy it, as I hope you did, if you could perhaps consider checking out my channel, Boring Dad Gaming, where I do a lot of long plays, playthroughs, tactical titles, RPGs, adventure games as well. It'd be wonderful. And perhaps even think about subscribing as well. So, but for now, I'll just say thanks very much, and bye for now.